Hey, it's Mike Ambright with FlipNerd.com. Welcome back for another exciting expert interview where I interview successful real estate investing experts and entrepreneurs in our industry to help you learn and grow. Today I'm joined by Garrett Zander. He's a real estate investor, a mentor, a coach, and he's a fellow podcaster as well. Like many investors, Garrett learned early on that the key to success in real estate investing actually comes down to marketing and lead generation. That's what it's all about. If you don't have good marketing and you don't have leads, then you don't have a business. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Lead generation and marketing for your real estate investing business. And Garrett's going to share some tips in here on how you can be more successful. Before we get started though, let's take a moment to recognize our featured sponsors. RealtyMogul.com is an online marketplace for real estate investing, connecting borrowers and capital from accredited and institutional investors. Get a rehab loan fast and close in as little as 10 days with rates starting as low as 9%. For more information, call 888-296-1697. B2R Finance makes loans tailored specifically for rental investors. They can help you unlock equity from existing properties so you can get cash to grow your rental portfolio. That's huge, and it opens up lots of opportunities previously not available to rental investors. Need a loan? Call 855-819-4412 or visit b2rfinance.com today. National Real Estate Insurance Group is the nation's leading provider of insurance to the residential real estate investor market. From individual properties to large-scale investors, National Real Estate Insurance Group is ready to serve you. We'd also like to thank Crestar Funding, Mid-Atlantic IRA, and Renters Warehouse. Please note, the views and opinions expressed by the individuals in this program do not necessarily reflect those of FlipNerd.com or any of its partners, advertisers, or affiliates. Please consult professionals before making any investment or tax decisions, as real estate investing can be risky. Hey, Garrett, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. It's kind of funny. I was in a meeting recently with a whole bunch of other of the real estate investing podcasters. And actually, we were at a separate mastermind. It just so happens that a lot of the guys that are in that group are also podcasters. So I always love talking to other podcasters, and we were talking about it up front, how it's always weird when you're on the other side of the microphone, if you will, to where you don't have to worry about the flow of it. You just kind of let the other person lead. So anyway, I'm glad you're here.
No, I'm glad to be on this side of it. Again, It is kind of nerve-wracking to try to drive the conversation, so I'm just going to sit back and relax and answer questions.
Yeah, man, you can just shower us with your insights.
So I'm going to try to do.
Cool, man. Well, hey, before we get started with talking about marketing and lead generation and something that is obviously critical, a lot of people understand that, and some people don't understand it, but they eventually figure it out. At least they may not figure it out, but they figure out how important it is. But before we get started talking about that, why don't you kind of share your background about how you got started in real estate investing and how you kind of got to where you are today?
Sure, man. So like many other people, I was given a book by my dad, which was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, I read that years ago. I was still in high school when I read it, and it didn't make any sense to me. In fact, I was like, what the heck, Dad? This book tells me I don't need to go to school. So anyways, I kind of put it aside, but long story short, I ended up realizing that I was more interested in real estate than I thought I was, and me and my dad actually joined a Rich Dad coaching program years ago, and they taught us about lease options, and that was all he taught us back then. This was back in 2007 or something like that. Got a couple lease option deals, and then during that time, our market, amongst many others, crashed. So all my option prices were no good. Yeah. So I had to get out of all those deals. And anyways, being in that business, I started meeting a few people, and I met a guy who was doing short sales. And we ended up hooking up and started a short sale business. And from the short sales, we were actually processing them. We started buying them and then rehabbing them. So right from basically kind of creative financing right into rehabbing. And I've been doing that now since 2008, rehabbing houses. And then from there, I've transitioned into we still rehab, but do some more wholesaling now, and also some virtual wholesaling.
Okay. So, and your home base, though, where you started, that's a little bit north of L.A., right? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm in Antelope Valley, like Palmdale, Lancaster. So we're about an hour north of L.A. Smaller market. I remember it's funny back in when I was a kid. Like you see the weather the temperatures for the weather, our cities were never on there. We had to kind of figure out what our weather was going to be. But now you actually see our cities on there, so we're a little bit bigger than we were, but still a small town.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
And I do want to make sure that kind of after we talk about lead generation and marketing, you talk a little bit about your, because you started a little bit before I started in 2008. You started a little bit before I did, and just how your kind of evolution happened. So I know you were always just kind of investing in your market, rehabbing. Then you kind of worked your way into wholesaling, and then eventually virtual wholesaling, where you're actually doing deals in other markets across the country. Which there's,
Right.
we're here. People that listen to my show religiously or often, you've heard that many times lately. There's a lot more people that are doing that and really kind of enabled a lot by technology, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'd like to talk a little bit about that and how you kind of evolved to. It's just a very different mindset of saying, I invest here, I know everything, I can go actually physically meet the person, drive by the house if I want to. I'm never going to see that person, I'm never going to meet that person, I'm never going to physically see the house. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic to go from one to the other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so talk about, I think, a lot of the people that ultimately have a good level of success with real estate investing, they ultimately realize they have to be a good marketer. They have to generate leads, and they have to do it consistently. You have to be committed to just investing money consistently or resources consistently, like clockwork, knowing that investment may not pay off for months or sometimes years. The leads come back around.
Right.
And so just talk about, I mean, did you know that up front, or was it something that you kind of figured out over time?
Kind of figured out over time.
I guess if you started doing short sales and stuff like that, you weren't really marketing direct to seller at that point, probably.
No, actually, oddly enough, that's really the guy I worked with was actually, maybe he knew from somebody else. I don't know, but we would get our NOD list and ultimately would try to get direct to seller. That was the goal way back even then. So
okay. So talk about that, because I think that's something that is kind of on that. A lot of people get into real estate investing and they assume, well, I can just go find deals, and it sounds easier than it is before you start doing it. And a lot of the difficulty comes down to consistent lead generation. So talk about, I guess, maybe your evolution of when you realized that you had to become a good marketer and steps you took to kind of improve.
Well, after the 2008, 9, 10, when short sales sort of dried up, I mean, they'll always be around, but we actually had a really dry spell because we stopped marketing because there wasn't 100 NODs a day, and that was kind of when we realized that it seemed so obvious, but like, wow, we were sending letters to these people, getting leads and meeting them, and then turning them into deals. We needed to figure out then what who we wanted to target, and so it was around the time that short sales sort of dried up that we thought we need a new motivation. And so it was kind of like a duh moment, like, you figure out what that motivation is and send the same letter to them and get your phone ringing again. Because what happened was, like in 2010, we were actually at the auctions. We were buying a lot of properties at the trustee sale auction. We stopped trying to stop the auctions, and now we're actually there buying them. And so in that time frame, if we weren't buying at the auction, we had nothing going on. And so we realized, wow, we need to fill the pipeline. How do you fill the pipeline? Well, you could go back to your marketing. Your letters and bandit signs.
Yep. Hey, for those that don't know, tell us what an NOD is.
An NOD is a notice of default. So in my market, it's when someone's 3 months behind on their payments, a bank files a notice of default saying, basically you got to make this payment now, or we're going to take your house to foreclosure.
Yeah, and those generally get posted in the public records where you can either buy lists or probably go pull information yourself, and then you kind of realize, hey, maybe that's somebody I could market to.
Yeah, so it's a public record out here. You could go get it yourself, but it was still kind of hard in California. Not hard, but it was a pain in the ass to get it in California. So to buy from a list source was a lot easier.
Yeah. So I know that you mentor and coach some people, and you've been around long enough to where you. I tell people all the time, when you start to teach other people like how to achieve some level of success or be successful as a real estate investor, it turns out probably the best lessons are the things that you teach them not to do from things that you learn not to do along the way. But for a lot of newer real estate investors, maybe you could share some info on how to think about generating leads, or what some of the different options are as to, where they should get started?
Yeah, a lot of people that come to me, that's their biggest complaint, and I get it. I get that lead generation is definitely frustrating for some people, especially if you don't know what you're doing. But it doesn't have to just be a buy list and then send letters to this list. There's other things you can do too, and that's what I like to teach people a lot is explain to them. You're not a ninja. That's kind of like a theme of the show right now. You're not a ninja in this business. You need to let people know what you do. And the more people you tell what you do, the more chances you have of somebody saying, oh, you know what? I do want to sell my house, or I know somebody wants to sell their house, etc. And I've actually had a student who he's in a great business for this. He has a job. He's a mover. And I was like, man, every house you go to, find out why they're moving. What are they? Were they renters? Are they moving out? Because they got a new place to rent. If they are, find the landlord, and et cetera. And so I realized that if you can't be a ninja. You got to tell people what you do in this business, and the more people you tell, the more chance you have of finding somebody.
Yeah, I think I've talked about this a few times lately. A lot of people don't realize that, and it's even for veteran people, it's still hard to make that commitment to network with people, because it's not like if you go to a real estate club or some sort of networking event, or you just meet somebody at wherever, that it's almost never going to happen that you say, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm a real estate investor and I buy houses." And they say, "Well, guess what? It's your lucky day. I have a house for sale. Here's a contract. Let's write it up right now." I mean, that just doesn't happen.
Right.
So
Right.
what's more typical is you meet that person. You have to find some way to build that relationship over time where you at least stay in regular contact. Otherwise, you're not going to be top of mind when they do come across a deal. And then months or years from now, you get that deal. I mean, I've shared this story with a few people before, that I was at a HOA meeting in my last house where my wife and I lived, totally randomly. And I had a logoed shirt on, and they're like, "Oh, you buy houses?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, my grandmother passed away like 4 years ago, and the house has just been sitting there. Would you be interested in looking at it?" Like, "Yeah." Like, how fast can we go? And we bought the house. And it was just kind of that was a random one. That was much quicker. But the second part of that story is that, and I will say, this is one like practice, do what I say, not what I do, because I really didn't do a very good job of following up with. I mean, I haven't done I guess this is a lesson that I've never really heard anybody say before, is following up with sellers. Like, you just generally don't think, well, I'm going to buy another house from the same seller. But in fact, this woman contacted us like 2 years later, and she's like, "Yeah, her sister had passed away, and she's like, I just wanted to see if you'd be interested in buying her house."
Wow.
And how many people out there that are listening to this, like, ask yourself this question, that bought a house from somebody? Do you follow up with the seller just in case, hey, if you happen to know anybody we could help, or that might be in the same situation, we're here for you, and be able to, you got to do it tactfully, but be able to follow up over time. I mean, I don't know very many people that are doing that, and it's a really small opportunity on the grand scheme of things, but a house or two here and there can make or break most investors. But I think it's just that large portions of time could go by from somebody you met, and as long as you can stay top of mind, you might get some deals from them.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Thinking back on a few of the short sales, we had one seller who we bought a house from, and then it was a short sale. He owned his other house at the time. That's why he sold the one. And he contacted me years later via email, an email address I checked maybe once a couple of weeks just to check. And he was ready to sell the house he was currently living in. And that's the only time it's ever happened. But even then, you said this right now, I've never thought about staying in contact with other sellers. That's a really interesting point, and kind of a ninja type tactic,
Well, I lucked into that one. I was not using ninja tactics. That one snuck up on me, but
that's all right.
But it's just you when things like that happen, it makes you think like, wow, for years I could have been following up with all these people and it never did. And we've had people that call in before that, yeah, we sold our mom's house to you a couple of years ago, and now my dad passed away too, or just things like that happen. And so
right.
I think this is a little bit outside of lead generation, but if you treat people right and they had a good experience with you, then kind of that karma comes back around to you too.
I agree. In 2008 and 2009, it was really hugely important to be tactful and to be not just nice, but understanding. Back then, man, foreclosure was new to people.
Yeah.
It was scary to people actually back then. Now people think about foreclosure like, I'll stay in my house for a year and not pay the bank. But back then, I mean, people were like worried that someone's going to come and change their locks like while we were there, and you learned a lot back then of how important it was to build rapport and to get people to trust you and know that you're there to help them. And if you were genuinely there to help them, good things could happen.
Yep. So talk about for a lot of real estate investors, I think one of the things that people struggle with is because a lot of newer real estate investors, especially, and even some veteran folks, they start by trying to do everything themselves.
Right.
And that can be a daunting task. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I know I'm a real estate investor, but I have to be like basically running a mini advertising agency too. I need to like be good at that too. But maybe just talk about, and I don't even know exactly what you do, but how people can, outsource some portions of that so that it gets done consistently and they don't necessarily have to do all the legwork themselves.
Yeah, I mean, today there are a lot of ways to help you track that, which is really important. Is obviously tracking your leads and your marketing. Podio is a big one. I learned all my Podio stuff from Joe McCall, and I don't even use it as well as I should. I really wish I did, but I think when you first get started, it's okay to be everything. You can be the one that writes the letters. You can be the one that seals the envelopes, and all that stuff. But eventually, we started having somebody. We actually had a human being write our letters for us. She would just like standards at school, just wrote a letter after letter after letter, just without even having the names. What we had her do was just get a pad of paper and write the exact same letter with dear and leave that part blank. And then when we got the list, she would just go and put the name in there and fill the envelope out. But today you can use click to mail or yellowletters.com. I mean, there's so many ways now where you can. You don't have to be the person doing it on. You could pay these websites to generate these letters or postcards for you and send them out for you. You just have to track them. Ultimately, I mean, to me, it's about the tracking is the most important. That's where Podio really comes into play.
Yeah. And you're saying tracking for the purposes of knowing what works and what doesn't, what your kind of cost per lead is or cost per acquisition to see whether that's the best place to spend your money or not.
Yeah, and not necessarily just that. That's obviously important. You want to know your money's working, but tracking for follow-up. We didn't really talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
Follow-up is key. You can't you can't send. Sorry about my cough. You can't send one letter to somebody and hope they call you back. I mean, again, and that was something I had to learn the hard way. You talked about when I realized how important marketing was, and again, I sound like I'm like an old timer now, but back when the short sale days, you could send one letter to this person in that when their NOD was filed, because again they were scared back then. So if they got your letter, they called you off for one time. If they didn't call you off for one letter, you moved on because there was 100 more people tomorrow in the same situation.
Yeah.
Point is, I learned though when you get to other type of motivations like absentee owners or just a vacant house, which is obviously absentee owner, but they get one letter from you, they're like 2, 3, 4 letters. Now all of a sudden they're like, maybe I should call this guy.
Yeah.
So I guess what I mean by tracking is I've learned you have to know who you're sending letters to, and when you sent them something, so you could send a follow up letter to them or follow up whatever to them. So
yeah. In terms of so maybe you could kind of share. I know you started off as primarily a rehabber and didn't quite even understand the wholesaling piece. And we had somebody else on the show recently, I think, that talked about how the best wholesalers are good at rehabbing because, rehabbing is kind of fundamental to like knowing what it's going to cost you to do something and really understanding it. People that just like, I wholesale houses and I estimate the rehab is $10 a square foot. It's like, well, you've never been there and you don't even know what it needs. So that's probably not a good estimate.
Right.
But that's the kind of the foundation of really understanding how to sell a property is really knowing what has to go into it. But so you kind of evolved from a rehabber to a wholesaler and then started to do some virtual stuff. So maybe kind of share that story and how you evolved and why you evolved, I guess.
wholesaling is a pain, or wholesaling, rehabbing is kind of a pain.
Yeah.
Even though we've been doing it for a while now, we, I guess I hate to say it this way, but back when we started this, we never had plans to systematize it or to build a business out of it. We just wanted to make $30,000 every time we sold a house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that was like the plan. I guess you could say I was kind of young too. I was 20, I don't know, 25, something like that, years old at the time. So like, just want to make a bunch of money selling houses, right? It wasn't like a business. Well, it's obviously become one. I mean, I'm still doing it, but that being said, I for years I continued to do everything: lead generation, meeting sellers. I walked the properties. I did the scope of work. I met the workers there, and then I managed the property, and all that stuff. So eventually, I kind of got burned out, and the biggest burnout was dealing with the workers. Unfortunately. It's a tough thing because they want to make as much money as they can, and you want to spend as little as you can. And you go through a lot of people. I've never had a worker work for me for more than maybe 4 or 5 houses, and it gets become kind of a pain. And I don't mean to scare anybody away from this. I mean, there are people like Justin Williams, for instance. I mean, I would love to continue to learn from that guy and how he systematized rehabbing, because to me it's an amazing process. But point is, I became kind of burned out on it, and over that time I started listening to a lot more podcasts, and wholesaling was become a normal thing to me, and so I knew what it was, and I knew now how people were buying and selling houses without their own money. And so as some leads started to come in, I literally just kind of picked and choose. I was like, I don't feel like messing with this one. And the profit margin isn't enough to make it worth my time anymore.
Yeah.
And so I started wholesaling them. I just started kind of, I don't want, again, it sounds kind of weird, but I just kind of started getting rid of them and making some money doing that. I didn't care if I was making $1,000. If it didn't cost me $1,000 to generate that lead. So I was like, good, that's great. And then it was a realization that you could monetize almost every lead. Of course, that's crazy, but I mean, you can monetize a lot more leads by being able to wholesale them. Because again, when you're rehabbing and you're borrowing money or whatever to have the money for rehabbing, you do run out of money eventually, or you're tied up eventually. So we would have some leads back in 2011 and 12 come in where we couldn't really do anything about it. So we just kind of let it go. And that's why I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, So it was a combination of realizing that, we need to figure out a way to monetize as many leads as possible, and me being kind of burned out.
Yeah.
So.
I understand that. I mean, there have been times, I know a lot of people that were, large rehabbers, and something just happens one day and they're like, man, I'm going to wholesale everything. I need a break. Or there's a lot of legitimate reasons why you want to have multiple exit strategies. Obviously, like, you could run out of capital. It's like you could be rehabbing a bunch of houses and you're just tapped out, or capacity issues, like you just can't get to them all. Or it could be that, it's just too far away, or in a part of town where you don't really want to rehab. Could be in the hood, but there's someone for that house. It might not be you.
Right.
And so there's a lot of legitimate reasons why you would do that. So then at some point, talk about how you kind of got into more virtual wholesaling, which allowed you to start buying houses, in other markets outside of your own.
Yeah, when I realized wholesaling was so much easier than rehabbing. I mean, it still has issues and it's not easy, but anyways, it was easier than rehabbing as far as the amount of work I had to do. I hooked up with a guy who was generating leads with a website nationwide. His website, he was an SEO guy, so he had leads coming in all over the place. And he was like, "Hey, look, do you want to work these leads?" And I was like, "Sure, let's see what happens." This was actually just last year. Well, it was just 2014, and I said, "Sure, let's go for it." And so I started calling people in Tennessee, New Jersey, Alabama. I just called them, and I was like, I was going to figure it out, And as I started to figure out what I was going to do once they said they wanted to sell, and it started to work, I realized I was doing even less work than I was with a local wholesaling deal. So I was getting more excited. I guess, like I said, I'm kind of becoming an old-time lazy guy, because the easier it is, the more I want to focus on that,
Yeah.
So, it's not the easiest, but the less work I had to do, the more I was like, that's what I want to focus on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think a lot of real estate investors, you kind of go through phases in your life. You got family and you got different things, and you're like, man, how is there an easier way? Is there? And it's not just real estate investors; it's all entrepreneurs. You're like,
Right.
even if your business is doing really well, but you just kind of get tired, and you're like, how do I not work this hard forever?
Right.
Or it's not working at all, and you're like, this isn't going to work. What do I have to do differently? It's like evolution. You got to figure out how to change, right?
Yeah, Todd Toback is a great example of that. He was doing a lot of big business, making $200,000 a year. And he woke up and he was like, I hate this, and so he's obviously become a big systems guy and building a business. And this is building the business side of it is all kind of a new thing for me for the past year and a half with real estate. Like I said, it really was about I was just going to flip houses and make a bunch of money and then eventually buy an apartment building that cash flowed this much money every month. And I would never do this again, And again, evolution, like you said, I've realized that to really make a house flipping business, you have to treat it like a business. And so that's, the transition right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we have just a couple minutes left here. Garrett, why don't you tell us about, maybe give some kind of advice to people that from a marketing and lead generation standpoint, what's the mindset they should have if they're kind of early on in their career or maybe even new, and they're looking to try to get started? How should they think about going into this?
I think you have to be consistent and persistent. And also I'd like to tell a lot of my new students who are really new to this is don't be afraid to send out maybe 20 letters a week. It doesn't. You don't have to be like the Sean Terrys who are sending out 100,000 letters a month, or who knows what he's doing these days. But you can send out 20 letters a week and eventually get things building out there. It's better to do something than nothing.
Yeah, that's
and then stay consistent. I had a podcast. A guy interviewed. He said, if he had $1,000 for a marketing campaign, he would rather take that $1,000 and use it for a campaign over the course of 3 months to the same list, as opposed to just throwing $1,000 at one list and then never going back to that list.
Yeah.
So kind of back to the whole follow up. So, if you have a list or you're sending 25 out a week, just make sure that the following month you send to that same 25 again.
Right.
Sorry, I kind of went all over the place there. I didn't mean to, but
no, that makes sense. I think consistency is key, and hearing that consistent message. And I think people get you should get it if you get a bunch of mail at your house that you just throw in the trash, and you should get that. A lot of people are not even going to see your message. It's just a noisy world from an advertising standpoint. So you got to kind of hit people over and over again. Be consistent.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Garrett, hey, just real fast, one more thing. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, so I'm the host of the Real Estate Strategy Lab podcast. I took that over from Jeff Koga. Well, we're still involved in it together with Jeff Koga, and I do very similar podcasts. I find people that are either just a local expert or kind of big names. Like I've interviewed Todd Toback and Justin Williams and whatnot, and so anyways, you go to realestatestrategylab.com. I took over, I think, around episode 32. But the episodes before are also great. realestatestrategylab.com.
Awesome. We'll add a link down below the video here. So,
Great.
Garrett, thanks so much for joining today. Appreciate your time, my friend.
No, I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun being, again, on this side of it, man. So thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome. Well, take care and stay in touch, please.
Okay, Mike. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you. Are you a member of FlipNerd.com, the most robust real estate investing platform in existence, where you can find off-market wholesale deals and great vendors literally in your market? You can get access to advice from experts and learn about local clubs and events right in your backyard. If not, please visit FlipNerd.com and register for a free account. You can register in less than a minute. It's pretty much the coolest site that's ever existed in the real estate investing industry, so get on over to FlipNerd.com.